Welcome to the Media Cat Magazine podcast. Thank you for tuning in for the next in our series, Rebel with a Cause, with me, Opal Turner. For this series, we are talking about the relationship between creativity and strategy, or in my other words, art, science, and logic. It's my pet theory that strategy and planning can be a creative secret weapon and that we overly separate the disciplines in our industry. Today, we're talking to the lovely Kenyatte Nelson, previously Chief Brand Officer at N Brown Group and the non-exec director at the British Retail Consortium. Welcome to the podcast, Kenyatte. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I feel very fortunate and blessed and privileged. I'm not quite sure why I'm special enough, but I'm going to do my best to sound intelligent and charming and all the other good stuff you want podcast guests to sound like.
Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous how humble you are. I just cannot possibly cope. Thank you for taking the time to talk to little old
my pleasure.
Me on a Friday afternoon. But I'm so excited. So let's just get straight into it.
Sure.
So let's start with just learning more about you.
Sure.
Can you tell us a bit about your journey and how you've got to where you are now?
Sure. So you can probably tell from my funny accent, I'm from the U.S. I grew up in the States. I grew up in a place called Charlotte, North Carolina, which is the southeastern part of the U.S. It's probably best known for a few things. Michael Jordan being one of them, if you went to school there. And also it's a place that's very genteel. That's the word I would use to describe it. It's the kind of place where everyone speaks to you. Everyone is in your business, but in the best way. Everyone's incredibly friendly. They want to feed you, like food is love. All the stereotypes about the South and the southern part of the U.S. are definitely there. There's an air of conservatism for sure. But what is great about the South in that part of the country is the people. And I think my fascination with kind of sort of humans and the way humans engage and interact and what drives their behavior started because I grew up in a place where everyone was more interested in being interested in people than they were in being interesting, if that makes sense. And so I grew up there. I went to university in Florida, a school called Florida A&M University. Florida A&M is a historically Black college. It was what's called a land grant university, one of many after the Civil War. Land was given to institutions to set up universities of higher learning or places of higher learning for Black kids who at the time couldn't go to other schools because that was before desegregation, right? But those schools still are alive and well today. I went there for undergrad and my MBA, and it was the first time in my life, really, where I was in a place where I kind of sort of looked around and everyone I saw looked like me. It's tough to kind of sort of describe this, but when you exist in a place and space where you represent like 12, 13% of the population, most of the time through your life, you walk through life and don't really see anyone who looks like you. And that's if you've never experienced that phenomenon, I would encourage you to do it. Go to a foreign country like, Japan, Africa, and see what it's like to walk around and not see yourself. And so I went to that school mainly because they had a great business school, and two, because I wanted to see what that was like. It was incredible and formative for me, and absolutely loved it. I was there for 4 years undergrad, 2 years grad school, graduated, started working for a small business called Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, Ohio, as a brand manager. I studied marketing. And that's begun my career in the context of marketing, creative thinking, strategy, and brand building. And I've been on that journey ever since. 16 years with Procter & Gamble. I moved to Switzerland, Geneva, in fact, in 2010. We'll talk about that a bit later, I guess. And then haven't been back to the States to live since then. So I've been here for 12, 13 years almost. 5 or so in Geneva, spent since 2015 in the UK, where I've worked with various companies and the same guys. So it's been a hell of a journey. I've loved it, and it shaped me in ways that I'm still learning, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm interested. So you went straight from doing your undergraduate degree and into an MBA. Intense.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. You know why I did it. So, not maybe as intellectually, or psychologically, interesting as you might think. Mainly, I did it because I knew if I left undergraduate school, got a job, started making money, there was no way I was going back to being a poor college student again.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, if I'm going to be broke, I might as well continue the trend and then do 2 more years and get the MBA. I was fortunate because I was a pretty good student in high school. I got a full ride. And so my undergrad and grad school was paid for. I got an academic scholarship.
Amazing.
So it was a great decision, really, really fantastic for me. I did lots of kind of sort of co-ops and internships during that time period. Worked in banking for a time, worked in media, was a business called CNN in the US, a broadcasting company. I sold pharmaceuticals. I did everything, all sorts of stuff. And just to figure out what it was I wanted to do before I went to Procter & Gamble.
No, I find it fascinating because it seems to me to be a bit of a theme that I've had that I honestly have not intentionally cast for, but with guests that I've had on, so many people have this one really intense drive and motivation, and two, try everything, and that's part of their kind of superpower, in my opinion, is people who want to learn and are curious.
Yes.
And so just do all of the things.
Yes. All of the things. So I didn't mention this, but I would classify myself, if someone were to say, who are you? What are you? Which is a weird question to ask, but in that context, I would say, look, I'm probably more anthropologist than I am marketeer. So because of my formative years and the way I was raised and where I grew up, I have a deep, intense, and very genuine love of people. I love to meet people. I think, in fact, no time spent with a human is wasted. I genuinely believe this. And because of that, I've always been interested in how people think, what drives their behavior, why we do the things that we do. My father used to say, God will teach you the same lesson over and over again until the day you learn it. And so I always thought, well, why is it so difficult for us to learn stuff? Why do we have to go through, the pain of something over and over and over again? And so I've always been fascinated with, and I'm hopelessly curious, to your point, about all things. I'm the kind of person who probably knows lots of a little bit about lots of stuff because I like to get exposed to things, and I find there are very few things in this life that I don't find interesting, genuinely. And I think that curiosity has served me well in my life and also in my career as a marketing professional, because marketing in my mind is fundamentally about taking a proposition, product, service, and communicating that to customers in a way that drives a different kind of behavior. And I don't think you can do that effectively if you're not really, really interested in the kinds of things that drive human behavior. And so if I've done any good in my career, it's been in part because of that.
That's beautiful, honestly. Firstly, it's just...
No, thank you. You're very kind.
Just a stunning way of looking at the world. And I think we should all probably look at it a little bit more like that. But it's fascinating because you and I actually started talking because of some stories of success. So
yes.
I would love to know, before we delve into that a little bit deeper, what is success for you?
Yeah.
How would you define success?
Yeah, this is an interesting question.
It's a big question.
So look, I think success has to be defined inherently and internally. A lot of people would debate this point and say, look, in the physical world or in the commercial or capitalist society, the metrics and measures of success are defined for you. There are scores that are kept in terms of, business turnover or profitability. or bank accounts, you know, what you can procure and gain in this world. And I don't for a second suggest that those things are not true, or even kind of undervalue or underplay the reality of that. But at the end of the day, only an individual, you, me, your listeners, can define what success looks like and feels like for those people. No one else can do it for you. If you allow other people to define success for you, one of the main challenges with that is the goalposts will always move, right? Depending on who you're speaking to that day, depending on a different person's perspective, the measures and metrics of success will shift, and likely it will mean you'll never achieve them. So I think for me, success has to be inherent. It has to be owned by the person who is seeking to define it for themselves. So for me, what success looks like is not monolithic. It's, I can think about it in the context of my personal life, my personal relationships, which for me is about creating and cultivating relationships that are high value, and make me and the people that I'm in relationships with feel better about ourselves, and about the time that we spend with one another. Very simply stated, right? In my professional life, it's really rooted in fulfillment. It's really rooted in, am I doing work that fulfills me and leaves me feeling fulfilled? And that can come in lots of different ways. Am I being challenged? Am I learning? Am I doing things that I feel like are value additive? And I haven't always had that, to be fair. I've worked in businesses where I've enjoyed it and I've had a good time, but I've taken a step back and thought about, is this really fulfilling me in ways that I envision or imagine? And the answer was no. And I think that's the other reason why defining it for yourself is important, because then you can start to ask yourself the question, are the ways I'm spending my time and the people that I'm spending my time with, are they aligned and congruent with the way that I've defined success in my personal and or professional life? You need a litmus, I think, and you need to be able to take a step back and calibrate. Mm-hmm. Always ask yourself, is the trajectory I'm on at the moment aligned with how I've defined success for myself? And if not, do I need to take a step back and make a different choice? So people go through periods where we kind of sort of float through life, and life kind of sort of happens to us. But I'm a big believer in living life on purpose and being intentional. But that I believe has a prerequisite to be intentional and to live a life of purpose and to live life on purpose, rather than kind of sort of living life in this place and space of, I didn't mean for that to happen, or I didn't mean to do that. It requires an acknowledgement and an understanding of what you want and how you define success for yourself. So I think it's an important question to ask and to answer, but I think we have to answer that question. And we have to be willing and open to have that conversation at multiple times and places and spaces in our life, because it might change, and that's fine.
Absolutely. It's because it is so easy to get caught up in the intensity of life, and you, as you say, kind of get stuck doing things kind of by accident because something came up, you went with it, and you end up not necessarily in a place that you would have chosen had you stepped back and thought about it. And it's in a previous episode I was speaking to Ollie Scott of Unknown, a talent company, and he was kind of recommending that before people move jobs, they, for 30 days sit down at the end of the day and write down one thing that you didn't like about the day, essentially one thing that fulfilled you, and I can't remember what the third thing is, sorry Ollie, but it was such a simple, practical way of taking that metaphorical step back.
Yes.
And I think that's such a key thing for us to do as individuals, as people, but also as professionals.
Yes.
Over a period of time, especially in a world that is changing at
nuts, a rate of nuts.
I can't even, there's no word
absolutely.
for it.
What's great about that advice was I think interesting about that advice, as simple as it is, it's actually pretty profound. The unfortunate thing, however, and it's probably the reason why Ali mentioned it, is so many people don't do it. What's really, as a manager and a business leader, one of the things that I spend a lot of time on is the people in my organizations. And a lot of that time is spent on assessing, evaluating, cultivating talent. And as part of that work, and most businesses will have this, there will be some sort of evaluation, whether that's semi-annually or annually. There is a process, formal or informal, where line managers, senior leadership sit with the balance of the organization. Sometimes it's 360, sometimes it's manager to colleague and coworker. And there's a conversation that says what's working, what's not working. What do you want to do over the course of the next 6, 8, 12 months? How can I help? There's often a plan developed, a personal and professional development plan. And there is, to our earlier point, there is intention around building, cultivating, growing the talent and the capacity in the organization, because it's viewed as commercially and strategically important to do so. Most people, however, don't take that into their personal lives at all, right? So I have a friend of mine, he and his wife, once every couple months, sit down and talk about how their relationship is going. They intentionally carve out time.
That's beautiful.
Just to say, and it's not super formal. There's no kind of no one rocks up with the list of all the shit you did wrong. You know what I mean? It's not that kind of conversation. But he was telling me some of the questions they ask each other, which is, what did I do since the last time we had this conversation that really pissed you off? Yeah. What did I do since the last time we had this conversation that made you fall in love with me again? If there's one thing that I could do differently or better, what would it be? And it is genuinely a conversation that is rooted in and grounded in their desire to cultivate the relationship, the thing. It's two people talking about the thing versus the thing. It's not two people versus each other. We place the relationship in the center of the table and we talk about that. And we talk about all the ways we can together build it and grow it. And I certainly in my life have not sought out or kind of sort of created the space to have that kind of intention around my personal life, my professional life, outside of kind of where I've almost been told to do so. But to Ali's point, if you carve out the time and have really honest and open and intentional conversations with yourself, with your partner or your friends or whoever it is, I think the outcome can only be good. It can only be good. But it doesn't happen enough. I agree, 100%.
It's interesting how the example you give is about a couple, about a romantic relationship, because I often think that we have these, those stories of success. We have these rose-tinted fairy tale examples of how success happens. And that stands, for all types of relationships, yes, including professional ones, including romantic ones.
Absolutely.
And realistically, over a long period of time, regardless of what kind of relationship you have, there has to be a point where you intentionally do it with purpose, yes, as you say. Yes. And it's fascinating, isn't it, that story we tell ourselves about if something's meant to be, it will happen, or one of those ridiculous things.
Yes.
And it's really truly about intention,
yes,
and setting space and purpose and setting your mind to something.
Well, look, I think it's incredible how lucky you become when you start working towards something. My grandfather was a pastor. I grew up in the church. I heard all the time, God helps those who help themselves. And I'm not particularly, religious, But I think the lesson in that is move, speak, act with intention, and you'll be surprised what happens, right? And I'm not one for sure to say, look, luck doesn't occur. Absolutely it does, you know? But oftentimes those things happen because people have placed themselves in the right situations. And I think there is something to be said for being intentional in the way that you approach every element of your life. I once heard someone say to me, to your point on relationships, there are no bad relationships, there are only badly managed ones.
Wow.
And I think that's really interesting. And I think as I've gotten older and matured in my professional and personal life, I think that statement has held true more often than not. When I look at relationships in my personal or professional life that have felt broken or not worked, often it's because the two individuals involved haven't set an intention to mend it or to improve it. And because that's been the case, it's broken down. And it's not because it's broken down because that was always going to be the case. It happened because the two or three or however many people involved didn't set an intention to move that relationship to a different trajectory or place in space. So yeah, I think there's something to be said about being very clear about what it is that you want or we want, and then putting ourselves as much as we can in positions where good things can happen for us. I know that's been true of my life and career for sure.
And I really truly think that is so much of it. It's try.
Yes.
Try stuff.
Absolutely.
And it goes back to that curiosity. It's like, okay, try something. It didn't work. You could class that as a failure. You didn't end up wanting to be a quantum physicist, but now you know something really interesting and you have a different point of view on the world, and that is valuable to you and to all of the things that you will do with the rest of your life.
Yes.
In my opinion.
Absolutely. I think really successful people have a very different relationship with failure. I think they view failure simply as an outcome, and that outcome can be learned from. So if I am very clear on what I'm trying to achieve, I know the what, but I'm not clear on the how. The how is effectively a series of attempts that conclude with a success or a failure in the context of getting to what I want to achieve. If it succeeds, I found a way to do it. If it does not, I found a way not to do it. And I learned from that attempt and try a different approach. And I think really successful people, their relationship with failure is not an emotional one. They don't get emotionally attached to the outcome. They're emotionally attached to what they're trying to achieve. Right. And that's what they're emotionally attached to. And so whether or not what I did in that moment moved me closer or further away is only a data point. If it moved me closer, do more of that. If it moved me further away, do less of that. And some people get caught up in the emotional attachment to the perceived failure in the moment and then stop trying.
Which is really the worst thing you can do in any situation, I guess. It's fascinating actually, because it really ties in to, those stories of incredible success and failure that we actually started talking about. One of my favorite recent ones is David Ogilvy, who, just in case listeners don't know, didn't actually work in advertising until he was 38, randomly decided out of nowhere that that was going to be his career. No one in the US hired him, but an agency in London did, and he became the most famous copywriter in the world. And so, to your point, he was an outlier. And yes, I have just reread Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers because it's a great book. And if you haven't read it, anyone do read it because it's fascinating. But this podcast is often focused on the kind of the outliers, the folk who have a less than traditional career, a less than traditional skill set, a less than traditional kind of background. So I obviously am all about that. But I'm interested, how do you feel, you've got quite a clear and purposeful mindset as far as I can tell. Chief Brand Officer, big title. I imagine you have managed over the years quite large teams. I'm interested, how do you bring that kind of point of view and that clarity and purposefulness and intent to managing others and to an extent, I guess, managing other people's kind of careers and their purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few things that I've found to be important and also worthwhile in that endeavor. The first is getting clear on what we're trying to achieve individually and collectively, right? I think all teams, businesses, all groups of individuals who come together for a common purpose, there is a need to understand what we're trying to achieve and how we will know whether or not we've achieved it. And lots of businesses approach this in very different ways. But I think the reality is, I think that's critically important in managing teams and in managing businesses, being very, very kind of sort of razor focused and clear on how do we define what winning looks like, and what are the parameters of that success. And it might be time, it might be something different, it might be a very specific goal we set around customer acquisition or around revenue, around profitability, whatever it is. But I think getting people aligned around a very clear objective becomes, in essence, a force multiplier, because then everyone starts to row in the same direction. You can get a team of individuals who are superstars, but if they're not aligned to a singular purpose, they'll be beaten by a team of relatively mediocre people who are all rowing in the same direction. I genuinely believe that, and I've seen that. I played sports when I was a younger man, and I've seen that in my athletic my younger athletic career, and also as I watch sports, I've seen super teams come together and be utterly destroyed by teams that had no business beating them. The difference was alignment and congruence, and so I think that's really, really important. That's kind of sort of number one. I think the other one is, I think to be genuinely interested in the people you're managing is critically important. I think you can be a manager, that doesn't necessarily make you a leader. I genuinely believe leaders are chosen. Managers are selected, right? Managers are picked by the business. You can be promoted. You can get put in a position where you are managing people and their careers and their flight paths in the context of their work plans, their delivery plans. But that doesn't mean they see you as a leader. That's a very different thing, because I believe leadership is servitude. And in that context, really great leaders not only set vision and direction, they also enable and empower people and remove barriers. And I've always kind of sort of viewed my job as a person who does fundamentally two things. One, sets clear intention and purpose and defines what that is. And then two, removes barriers and enables people and let the really smart people get out of the way. I think it was Steve Jobs who once said, we don't hire smart people so we can tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do, right? And, I think what's really tough is in lots of businesses, senior leadership get promoted because they're really good at doing a job, right? And then unfortunately, what you sometimes find is they're really good at doing X, but that doesn't make them great managers and leaders, right? And
completely different skill set.
Completely different skill set. And I think really great leaders recognize when it's time to turn a different switch on and to cultivate a very different skill set so that you can help the organization move in a way that is aligned to purpose, and help the people in the organization do the work they've been tasked with doing by giving them the tools, physical or otherwise, to do so, and removing the barriers, physical or otherwise, that inhibit them from moving in that direction, and then get out of the way. And so for me, that those two things I think are really, really important.
There's so many things. I have so many thoughts. Is it one of the things that strikes me about what you said is the first things first, just decide where you want to go, what align on what the purpose, what our goal is. And to me, that's what strategy is.
Agreed.
And
Absolutely.
to a degree, what brand is, because it's you going as an organization from an individual level with your team, of course, but also from an organizational level going, we are going here, everyone on board.
Yes.
And that's why I think brand is as important internally as it is externally, because if you don't have that rowing in the same direction, then it's just foolish, surely.
Yeah.
But
I absolutely agree.
Brand is such a big word, and it's so kind of loaded in a weird way, because everyone talks about brand. Like Joe X from the street can talk about his favorite.
Yes.
I don't know, sweatshirt brand. But it's a lovely title, Chief Brand Officer. But what does that mean to you? What has that meant in your experience, and how much of that is that people management, is that leadership kind of role versus all of the other creative disciplines?
So I think if you have the privilege and pleasure of working in marketing, specifically if you are kind of sort of holding the reins and responsible for the building and cultivation of the brand, you're effectively you're responsible for one of the most powerful intangible assets that the business has in terms of creating value for the business. I think of my responsibility as one where I am effectively tasked with building the enterprise value of the business through the cultivation of and strength of the brand proposition. And then, so what is brand really, right? So I think human beings look at the world and we seek to make meaning of the world, right? And brand is one of the ways that commercial enterprises communicate that meaning. What do I stand for? What am I about? This brand is then imbued with meaning to communicate to the rest of the world, the customer base, potential customer base, this is what this product or service is about. And when it's done well, I think it drives distinction, differentiation, and also has a potential to drive significant improvements in the value of that proposition as well. But that requires care. And it requires an understanding, in my view, that the way people make meaning of anything is through their experience with that thing, right? So how do I come to learn that dogs are friendly because of my exposure and experience to dogs? How do I come to learn that I should look both ways when I cross the street because of my exposure and experience with that phenomenon, right? So lots of people think brand is a marketing thing. But if brand is the way consumers or potential consumers make meaning of your brand, actually it is everything. It is the end-to-end customer experience, because every time that customer or potential customer comes in contact or experiences a part of your proposition, they use that experience to inform how they interpret every time they see that logo, mark, name, right? And so, lots of businesses, I think, unfortunately, look at brand as kind of just consumer communication. And it is so much more than that. It's owned by the marketing guys over here, when in fact, it is as connected to product, to price, to where your product is seen and distributed.
To economic success.
The service and delivery proposition. If there is a part of your proposition that when a customer is experiencing it, there is an opportunity for that experience to derive or drive meaning, it's part of your brand. And so I feel quite fortunate to work and have had experiences working in businesses where that's been my responsibility and job title, because I view it as critically important. The creation of value that then creation of meaning that then creates value for the business and the enterprise.
Do you have a point of view in, as we've said, this nut speed that the world, the culture, the economy is moving at? Maybe less so the economy right now, but the world is moving at right now. Do you think the importance of brand has changed in any way?
That's a really interesting. I think what I do think has changed quite significantly, in fact, in the last decade or so. Some might even argue even longer than that. In the Western world, there's been a departure, a consumer abandonment, a departure, or I guess a move away from placing trust in institution, right? Whether that is government or religion or otherwise. I think what you have seen and continue to see is consumers placing far less trust in academic, scholastic, government, religious institution. And then whether this is on purpose or not, I'm not sure, but for sure there is a shift away from those things and towards brands. What's fortunately or unfortunately come with that is an expectation that brands fill some of that gap and that void, right? Some brands have stepped into that. Brands like Patagonia, for example, have stepped into that. But I think that is because they've always been very, very clear about who they are and why they exist in the context of the sector they exist in. So I think whether or not brands have asked for this, what becomes inconsequential. The customers are now kind of sort of expecting it. And so this idea that a brand needs to do more than just sell me things or convince me that their product or service is worth my attention, time, and ultimately my money, I think is something we are in the middle of and going to have to live with for the foreseeable future. If you are responsible for a brand and your core reason for getting out of bed every morning is just to flog stuff, I think you're in a tough position because the vast majority of products and services are commoditized. There are very few things that exist in the world that are truly, genuinely unique. Yeah. For the vast majority of products and services, you can get that stuff anywhere and from lots of different people. And so then the question becomes, how do you use brand to drive differentiation and distinction? One of the ways to do that is to lean into places and spaces where your brand and your product or service has more meaning than simply the thing. And it might be connected to the way you make people feel. It might be connected to the good you do for the communities you exist in, or any number of things. But my sense is this is the evolution that's taking place and the consumer abandonment of what you might class as kind of sort of the historic bastions of civility, and the movement from those things into an expectation that brands now deliver that is something that I think all of us in this profession have to think really deeply and intentionally about. A brand's role above and beyond the product or service that it sells, I think defining that, particularly now in today's world, is really, really important. I once saw a great slide for your listeners who are familiar with video games. There's an old video game called Mario Brothers, where if you eat the flower, you grow in size and you can spit fireballs. And this slide basically, and I've used this in presentation, this slide basically says, look, your customer is small Mario. Your product is not the flower. You sell the flower. That's what you make. But what you sell, really what you're selling is the idea of the badass that Mario becomes when he eats the flower, right? And so I think it becomes now especially even more critically important that people are clear, why are you buying this thing? Why are you engaged in this product or service? Brands that get that there is a connectedness between product and service and aspirational life or meaning, do much better, particularly when they're selling things that are commoditized. And you are 100% correct. People are going to look for meaning, and in the absence of finding that meaning in the places they're used to finding it, they will look for it elsewhere. Not to get too far off piste, but I think it's one of the reasons why you were seeing so many countries, following and listening to people that on the face of it, you would think, why on earth is this person even being given a platform?
Mm-hmm.
But in the absence of, thought leadership, people will find it. They will seek it out and they'll find it. And if you're the only person talking, then you're probably going to get a few ears, right?
Yeah.
And so from a brand standpoint, I think, practitioners in this space need to take that very, very seriously.
Incredibly seriously. And I think that point about being an anthropologist more than anything else is even more critical than it has ever been because of the world that we live in. And so for me, that also means, going back to why you kind of refer to yourself that way, is that interest in people, that curiosity. And for me, that means that brand involves all of the creative disciplines. And, for me, I'm fascinated by all of them, which is why I think brand is a great place to work. But what do you feel like some are more important than others in general, more so than ever? Because a lot of what we've spoken about, it's very logical, it's very strategic, it's very, let's be clear about what we're doing and why. But then equally, we're talking about helping people find kind of emotional value and purpose in life.
Yes.
So how do you feel about what makes up brand in terms of disciplines and skills for those that work in it?
It's a really interesting one. I'll be honest with you, Opal. I am loath to say that one discipline or another, it should be prioritized in this context. And the reason why I say that is because I genuinely believe that the end-to-end customer experience is so critically important in shaping the meaning that a brand has the ambition to create for itself. And in lots of businesses, there are people who work in areas of the business where they don't think that the work they do has an impact. And I think we as marketeers and as strategists do ourselves a disservice when we often big up the parts of the business that we touch and downplay the other parts of the business. When the reality is, if I think about brands that I've been a part of and where consumers have been exposed to them the most, when you do the simple maths, it's not in the areas that I touch, right? So if I think about, for example, in a pure play that I worked in, we've got a studio that shoots the product that shows up on the website. And it's kind of sort of, it churns out like factory, models come in, product gets put on model.
Hundreds of shots in a day.
Yeah, 100 shots a day. And it's almost kind of sort of a thankless job because everyone in the business just assumes this stuff just magically appears on the website, right?
Yeah.
And we spend all the time thinking about big campaigns and, how much money we're going to spend on Google Shopping and below the line and above the line and the whole bit, right? When you take a step back and you say, okay, how many website visits are we getting in a year? And you say, look, you're talking about 70 to 100 million site visits, not all independent, but that's a lot of eyes on that product. The amount of money you would have to spend in a campaign to drop that level of viewership, it would be astronomical amounts of cash, right? But we spend an inordinate amount of time focusing on campaign delivery, months, right? And then in the organization, no one was thinking about the photography in the studio on the 4th floor, even though loads more people were looking at that. And I think that phenomenon happens in lots of businesses. It's easy to spend time looking at the sexy stuff, but oftentimes it is the fundamentals. It is how many calls are coming through to the call center, and does the script make sense? How many people are calling and saying, where is my order? How many people are thinking about how, if I shoot the product in this way or that way, or if I include or not include video, how what's the impact that is having in the business? And I think I'm giving you an example in the pure play fashion context, but I think this is true of most businesses, particularly those that are aesthetically driven, where it's very easy for people to think about, the big creatively driven campaign stuff and not think about things like packaging or pricing, and things that have an enormous impact on the way a customer views your brand.
And it's almost wasteful. I don't know how you feel about it, but I almost feel like it's wasteful to not apply strategy and creativity in all of those places.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah. Well, I think, we talked about this the last time I was with you guys at the studio. I think, strategy, I tend to believe strategy has three elements. The first is a clear diagnosis. You can't come up with a strategy if you don't know what problem you're solving for. Mm-hmm. The second is you need some guiding principles, things you will and won't do. And then you need actions that are aligned to those principles and pointed towards solving that problem. In my mind, creativity is no different. Creative endeavors seek new ways to solve old problems. So because creativity is about, in its essence, I believe, problem solution, it is connected inextricably to strategy. It is strategic. It's not people coloring in and painting pretty pictures, right? That's art, right? And art can be incredible and evocative and emotive, but art in its core, I don't think is designed to solve a problem. Creativity is different, right? Creativity is problem solving, and problem solving is strategic.
And that's why I think it's such a shame that in so many places, and it's essentially, and for so many people, essentially the reason this podcast exists is because I don't see those things as separate either. But so much of the agency world, so much of the comms business keeps these two things completely separate. You can either be the rebel or you can be the cause, but you can't be both.
Yes.
And
yes.
I'm just coming to this I'm coming to this realization now as we speak, that because I kind of grew up professionally in a space that was brand first, always more brand than kind of marketing and advertising, if you can separate it in that way. Of course I don't think they're separate things, because brand dictates that it must be everything, and it's as much business as it is those soft skills or those data points. It's all of those things, and you can't separate them.
Yes.
And now I've just realised how I am who I am. So that's
well. I think one of the great disservices that creatives or people who work in creative endeavors have done, almost kind of sort of to themselves, is to talk about creativity as if it's this kind of sort of obscure, elusive giant living in the hillside that only I have access to because I have creative in my title, right? And how dare you, non-creative person, question my creativity, right? and the reality is, creativity does and should be allowed to exist in every element of the business. Creativity can live in lots of different guises, and creativity can be executed in lots of different ways and appear in lots of different ways and iterations. But that doesn't mean that if I work in finance or customer service or package design or, whatever else in the business, that I can't be creative in my thinking. And I think great business leaders allow for that environment to exist. And one of the ways I believe they do is through what we talked about earlier in terms of creating a very different relationship with failure. People, I think, get much more comfortable being creative, which requires bravery because creativity is new, when they exist in places and spaces and environments where the organization has a different relationship with failure.
Psychological safety.
Learning. Absolutely. Yes. So if I'm Amazon and I test pricing 1,000 times a minute, right? One of them is going to work. That means I failed 6,999 times, right? But that organization has a very different relationship with failure. Failure is simply trying to optimize and get closer to the outcome, the desired outcome. When that environment is created, that psychological safety, as you put it, is created, everyone in the business feels free and open and able to be creative in their thinking. And that can come to life in lots of different ways.
And vice versa, in my experience. So obviously I'm biased by my own experience of being a creative in kind of a small, slightly less traditional agency at the moment. But also, creatives I found often don't know what strategy is, how it helps them, how it gives them that purpose, and some people are brilliant at it and just don't know that they're doing it, which is fascinating. But it is that psychological safety of just not putting yourself in one specific situation, in one box where you live or die on whether something succeeds or not.
Yes, absolutely.
It's for me, it's opening that box up and going, okay, well, some days you're going to be over here, some days you're going to be over here, and that might work, that might not work. But we're all going towards the same place. And so it doesn't matter who or how or why that gets there. To your point about, it doesn't matter if the account person, it doesn't matter if the finance person comes up with the great idea. It doesn't matter if the creative comes up with the strategic insight. Like, as long as we're all going in the same place, surely that's what matters.
Correct. And what is required in that context is clarity about where we're going.
Brand.
Because if everyone's aligned to that, then the how becomes just a series of iterative steps. And learning. My father used to say 8 + 1 = 9, but so does 5 + 4. And in that lesson, I guess what he was trying to say is, look, don't ever think that there's only one right way to do something, because the way you have done it might work, and that's fine, but that doesn't mean it's the only way. And be open to, a person or a group or, someone saying to you, look, there's a different way to do this. And it might be a more efficient way. It might just be different. That's fine. I think really great managers and leaders do this very, very well, because what happens is, we talked this earlier, you get promoted for doing a job really well. And then you get promoted and someone steps into your previous role and they do the job differently than you. And then through your coaching and through your feedback, your feedback starts to look like the right way to do this is the way that I did it. And one of the things that I was taught very early in my career, and I do this to this day, is whenever I look at something someone has worked on, even if it's a one-pager, whatever it is, if my feedback doesn't fundamentally improve the thing, if it just changes it, then I don't give it. So if I'm like, oh, I would have said this, okay, but does that improve? Does that take us closer to what we're trying to achieve? If the answer is no, all it does is make it sound more like me, then cross it out. Don't even share it. It's not because it's not constructive. I haven't added any value. I've just made the person. I've just brought the person closer to my voice.
And the value to you of them is their own voice.
Correct.
And I think
exactly.
It's so easy for us to forget forget that like, you know, as someone, as a manager, as someone in a leadership position, your role is to help that person get to their right point, their goal, their purpose,
the best version of themselves.
Exactly. And
Yes.
in the process, get the organization to
Yes.
the best version of itself at the same time. And that doesn't necessarily mean it has to look like how you would get there, because it's not your purpose, it's theirs.
We're not looking to create clones. We're not the Borg in Star Trek. No one, the organization doesn't want or need lots of different versions of me.
Exactly.
And frankly, lots has been done empirically and otherwise to prove that diversity of thought is actually very commercially advantageous.
Loads of stuff in HBR. Loads.
Yes.
If you need any proof, anyone, just have a pop on over to HBR. There's tons.
Absolutely.
There's tons. And I think that part of that, and the reason that I make the podcast to a degree, is just to remind us of that fact. Just to remind us that, you know, someone else's experience doesn't have to look like yours, and also maybe that's a good thing. It's actually a good thing.
Absolutely. There is no leadership archetype. It doesn't exist. When people say, what does leadership look like? That's a circular question. Well, it looks like you. That's what it looks like. It looks like me. There is no way, archetypal way or way to lead or way to look like a leader. As we talked before, leaders are chosen anyway. So the best thing you can do is be authentic. I believe leadership is authentic. And because leadership is authentic, it means it will look different depending on who's in the seat.
Yeah.
Because, you're going to be the best version of you that anyone ever has been or could be. I think then you add to that the fact that leadership is broadly non-hierarchical. I don't think it has anything to do with hierarchy. Anyone can be chosen to lead, and anyone can be followed, irrespective of where they sit on the organizational hierarchy. And I think leadership is situational. It changes depending on what the organization needs.
So much.
And so I think those are the three things that if you are in a position of leadership or seek to be in one, to keep in mind, not to pattern yourself after someone you've read about or something you've seen in the organization. Take bits and pieces that you think work well. That's fine. Borrow, steal, reapply. But don't ever feel like you need to become anything other than a better version of you.
Yeah.
Just really quickly, Opal, we're still at the time. I need to run.
I was literally about to wrap up.
Okay.
I was literally about to wrap up. So, I mean, a final question. I'm pretty sure I know the answer. I'm gonna sub the word strategy for purpose in this context, but I always ask at the end of every episode, my theory that creatives need purpose and can make better use of it. I'm hearing from your answer that you agree.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's true. We talked a couple of weeks ago about my feeling that creativity or any creative endeavor seeks to challenge convention, and I think really great creatives, they seek to do that, and underneath that desire is they're being driven by something. I want to create a better version of X. I want to shoot a photograph in a way that no one has ever done it before. I want to play this character, Othello, making this up, in a way that no one has ever played this person before. That challenging or desire to challenge convention and come up with a new way to solve something that has existed before, I think has to come with purpose. It has to come with an intention, an objective in the mind's eye of the practitioner. And that's what I believe drives them and us to do the things that we do. In the absence of that, we just kind of sort of having a play. And that's fine. That can be helpful in the context of honing skill and craft. But when rubber hits road, in my mind, in the context of true creative endeavors, there needs to be purpose. There needs to be intention.
Well, it's that first step of strategy you mentioned, is just
Yes.
defining what the problem is so that you can figure out how to solve it.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, this has been so lovely. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Kenyatte. It's been an absolute joy